Today's video is sponsored by Native Sons Goods, makers of the best woven guitar, bag, and camera straps on planet Earth. And now the best is even better with a new line of hand-woven Maya Serape straps with USA organic herringbone hemp backing. Get 10% off when you use the link in the description, and remember, when you support my sponsor, you support this channel, and I sure appreciate it.
Hey y'all, it's Shitpost Friday.
Hello out there, all you good people. Brad the Guitarist here. It is time once again for another action-packed
Shitpost Friday.
First up this Shitpost Friday, some very, very sad news, and I like to get all the sad news out of the way up front, and this is especially sad news because this has happened to a young man not even in the prime of his life or the prime of his performing career, but in the very early stages. This young man, Evan Twitty, has passed away from a car accident in Indiana. He was a thumb-picking champion, great guitar player. I think if he had been allowed to continue to grow and develop, he would have been among the best. This was the first time, unfortunately, I had even heard of the young man, finding out about his death. So I wanted to share this with you. This is a celebration of his life video that was put up by the great Tom Bresh, who was his friend, mentor, and it sounds to me like a very close, almost brother-like figure in his life. I'll just let Tom take it over from here.
Hello everybody, I'm Tom Bresh. This video is a celebration of life for a gentleman that was like a son. He was like a little brother. He was a friend, a great entertainer, and a fabulous guitar player. We lost him in a tragic car accident on February 7th, the night of. So I have put together a video because I have known him since he was 10 years old, with his little squeaky voice into the voice of a man and the heart of a saint. I have a bunch of video, and I want to put it together so you can learn about my dear, dear friend, Evan Twitty.
But this young man was 18 years old. I can't imagine what his family must be going through, but I also can't imagine the loss that we've suffered as a result of losing somebody like this so early, with so much promise, so much left to give. He's just taken way too early. Some people are lent to us for a long, long time. We have a lot of great musicians for, 50, 60, 70 years or more, a lot of times, and they are able to bring joy for that amount of time to the people around them. And just to know that a kid like this, 18 years old, with so much talent, just talent oozing out of his fingers, out of every pore, has been taken from us so early, I can't imagine, we'll never be able to fathom the loss of that. And what that means to all of the subsequent years of guitar, virtuosity that we've missed out on, as a community. So rest in peace, Evan. I hope your soul can find peace. I hope your family can find peace. God bless you. God bless your friends. And yeah, just a real sad thing for everybody.
First guitar I ever bought with my own money.
For his young age, he had an array of great guitars. I said to his dad one time, I said, "You darn near went broke buying all those guitars." He said, "I didn't buy them." He says, "Evan worked for him and he bought them." He played nursing homes, he played shows, he played whenever he got a chance.
One of his local musician friends has set up a GoFundMe to help out his family in this time of need, if you guys feel so moved. To this point, the GoFundMe has more than doubled its original goal of $3,000. But I'm sure the family could use a little bit extra to help them cope. Sometimes, people, when they lose somebody, especially, I can't imagine losing a child, you're going to have moments where you just can't get out of bed. You feel like the world is such a weight that you can't bear it, I'm sure, and I don't even want to think about it. I can't imagine losing one of my kids, put it that way, and yeah, I hope the memory of Evan lives on long after today. All right, in a little happier news, Lindsey Buckingham, of course, the former guitar player, it's weird to even say that, but the former guitar player of Fleetwood Mac, he lost his Fleetwood Mac job, I guess it was about a year ago or so. He and Stevie Nicks just couldn't find a way to get together on things. I guess it's been that way since the late 70s, but he is launching a solo tour in 2020. He suffered a heart attack in 2019, not all that long after being let go from Fleetwood Mac, and there was some speculation at that time that maybe he wouldn't get his vocal prowess back because, you know, they have to intubate during the procedure that he underwent, and sometimes that intubation will cause permanent damage to the larynx. And so it looks like at least he's back to his former self. He's going to be able to sing. He's going to be able to play. So this might be a really good time if you're a great Lindsey Buckingham fan to go see the great Lindsey Buckingham one more time. Who knows how many more times somebody like this will be able to come around and entertain you. You know, as the tragic news with Evan Twitty before this shows, you know, we're not given any guarantees here, you know. I mean, and somebody like Lindsey, who's already suffered a heart attack, you know, you just never know with somebody like that. So this might be a good time to get off your rump, get off the couch, and go see the great Lindsey Buckingham in concert. Also in concert, we mentioned last week the Rolling Stones are going to be touring in 2020. And I thought this was kind of interesting. The Rolling Stones' Keith Richards quits smoking. So apparently he had kind of resolved to quit smoking about a year or so ago, and he has been cigarette-free since October of 2019. So, way to go. I mean, that takes a lot for somebody of that age to quit smoking. So, yeah, definitely props to Keith Richards. You know, I don't know if it's going to help his looks quite as much as he might have hoped, but, you know, I'm sure it's going to help his ability to breathe, and maybe he'll stay among us a little bit longer as a result. You know, the funny thing about this is, though, I mean, the irony, you know, is going to be that, you know, Keith Richards, he'll be dead within a year now because he quit smoking. It's what a funny analogy is. My wife's Jaguar. You know, we've been running it, and I think I had gone so long without changing the oil that when I finally did take it to have the oil changed, then it starts leaking oil. Of course, that's when it's going to happen because, you know, you basically have unclogged all the crap that's in there, keeping it from leaking. So, in true ironic fashion, I'm sure that's going to be the case. Does anybody want to start taking bets? What's the Las Vegas line on losing Keith Richards this next year? I might even be tempted to take that bet if it wasn't so macabre. But yeah, you know, funny stuff. Speaking of rock legends, the great Brian May was in a bit of a tussle down under. He went to visit Australia. I think he was doing some work that had to do with fire relief for the the Australian fires that have been happening. And he's down there for that reason, but he was at the airport and he was driving. I guess he had gotten an Uber or something, but whoever it was, his driver, was driving past some people who were fans of Queen, were standing outside the road and were holding up their Queen albums and stuff. So he stopped the driver. He made the driver pull over. He said, pull over. I want to meet these people and just talk to them for a minute. Somebody was there who was filming for a television station, and Brian, he let him film for a little bit, and then he asked them, hey, could you stop filming for just a bit so I can have a heart-to-heart with these, because they're real fans of his. And so he just wanted to give them a special few moments, and the guy just wouldn't put down his camera, and Brian just gets madder and madder, and he eventually goes over, and the guy acts like he puts down his big camera, but he whips out his iPhone instead and starts filming with his iPhone, which just really infuriates Brian May. So he goes over to the guy and basically slaps the iPhone out of his hands.
Rocker Brian May loses his cool.
Do you not understand? All right.
Come on, babe.
Get away. Brian, you go away now.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. After lashing out at our cameraman, May's ushered back to his car and apologises to the group watching on.
I'm sorry it was made ugly by this guy.
I mean, this sort of thing happens a lot with paparazzi and stuff around, you know, you see a lot of times when people have just fucking had it, you know, and they're tired of being followed around and tired of being, you know, I'm sure recognized and accosted and, you know. But, you know, Brian May, you know, to his credit, you know, he was stopping to greet some real fans, you know, and he wanted to give them something special to take away and an experience. And also, I'm sure he wanted just to talk to some fans, you know, for a minute or two, and then just to have the guy not put the camera down and give him a little bit of respect. I can totally understand that. I can't imagine being so famous that you're in the limelight like that 24/7 wherever you go. There's no escape from it. You know, I mean, nowhere in the world is Brian May not going to be recognized unless he shaves his head or something. You know, I mean, he would have to, that's probably what he would have to do to not get recognized, is shave his head, start wearing ball caps, maybe grow a mustache, you know, something like that. He could probably pull that off and not be recognized, but it wouldn't take that long, though, before the media started printing pictures of the way he looks now, you know, and you would just relearn what Brian May now looks like, so you'd know what to look out for. But yeah, I cannot imagine being that famous. You know, there's been a few times, which is just weird to me. I still haven't gotten over it, where I've been places, like even at the grocery store and stuff, and ran into some of the viewers of the channel who've been like, hey, man, I love your channel, like in just weird places, like seriously, like Kroger or something, getting groceries, and somebody come up to me and say, hey, you're the guitarist, right? And you know, I mean, I'm a nobody by comparison to somebody like Brian May, and I can't imagine what this would be like to have that happen, because that doesn't bother me. It's, you know, it's kind of a thrill. It's like, yeah, man, you know, and you know, for me, it's a thrill because it happens so rarely that it's like, all right, cool, you know, it's good to meet somebody who watches the channel, you know, small world kind of thing, you know. But with Brian May, it's just got to be constant. And, you know, I talked about this before, too, with like Paul McCartney. You know, there was some video of him, or some pictures of him, rather, where he was out, you know, by some train tracks, setting pennies on train tracks, you know, to make his own custom picks that he was going to use for guitar. And, yeah, I had commented at the time. I was like, yeah, it's probably about the only place that somebody like Paul McCartney could go and not be recognized and have a few moments of peace, you know. And even then, somebody's standing in the bushes taking pictures of him, you know, making his guitar picks. So I guess that's not even a safe place for him. But in a way, I don't feel for people like that, because, you know, they kind of, I guess they did ask for it. You know, they chose the life of an entertainer and had to know that comes along with the territory. But at the same time, you would hope at some point you could go back to being normal. But once you've reached a level of stardom that is superstardom, like Brian May has, there is no going back. You're going to be basically trapped inside this fisheye lens until, you know, your end of days. So I can understand, I can empathize with what Brian May is going through here. And, you know, I just wish people would just have a little bit of respect. And like, especially if somebody asks you, I can understand, like, you doing your job. You're getting some footage. If he was like, and probably even if he had put the camera down and said, Mr. May, you know, I appreciate it. Do you mind if I get a little extra footage just for some B-roll or something? Just, you know, I do have to have a job to do, and I'd appreciate it. You know, if he had put it to him like that or something, I bet you, you know, he would have even said, yeah, or go ahead or something, you know. I can definitely empathize with Brian on this one. So here's an article I read that I thought was really interesting. This is by John Bollinger. You guys probably are familiar with John Bollinger of Premier Guitar. He does a lot of the rig rundown videos on their YouTube channel. The title of this article is, Do We All Hate Our Own Guitar Playing? I just want to read a little bit of this to you and see what you think about this. It says, although the music world is reportedly full of egomaniacs, it seems like there are a lot of wildly talented, self-deprecating guitar players out there. When great guitar players deflect compliments and say they're stinking up the joint, I used to think they were so comfortable with their own badassery that they could afford to be gracious and appear humble. Now I think it's more likely that a lot of groundbreaking, talented players are as insecure about their playing as any of us, and I think he's probably right on about that. You know, we talked in recent weeks about all of the guitar fakery that has been happening, or allegedly, on Instagram, and about how guitar playing has become such a Olympic sport kind of competition, if you will, and the way we all feel about ourselves and about our playing. You know, sometimes when I pick up a guitar, if I'm not on camera, I'm perfectly fine. You know, I'm actually, usually, I'll start off kind of tentatively, usually, you know, kind of run over some scales or something. But every now and then I'll stumble upon something that I think is truly worth, you know, honing in on for a minute and exploring. And, you know, oftentimes I'll be up, you know, in the wee hours of the morning just playing something that no one in the world is ever going to hear. And it's some of the most beautiful playing I've ever produced, you know, and it's in the silence, in the dead of night, you know, where nobody is there except me and God, essentially. And, you know, my take on this has always been that I really do think that musicians, you know, great musicians, do their best work probably when no one else is around and no one else is listening. You know, I think we all kind of feel like our best stuff is done in the dead of night like that. And I think there's a reason for that, you know, because music is almost like a prayer. Any kind of creation where we are in the act of creating, where we're not just repeating or playing something that we've learned. If we're making something up on the spot, it is almost like a prayer. Whereas if we are remembering something and we are playing something that is more rehearsed, it's more of an action that we are carrying out. You know, it can still be prayerful even, and still be kind of a Zen-like experience, but it's not going to be the same as if you're making up something that is brand new, that it has you know, the spark of genius about it, and it has the footprint of the muse in it. You know, the thing about the muse is, you know, that's the root word of the word music to begin with, the muse. And a muse is something that is, it's also the root of the words like amusement, you know, something that sparks our imagination. You know, ancient people used to believe that the muse was a real thing, was actually a real spirit that would come and visit you at these times. And that's why sometimes we have it and sometimes we don't. You know, sometimes we are inspired by the muse, the spirit that comes and visits itself upon us. And other times we're not. We're not inspired by the muse. We're just running over scales. Songwriters will probably understand this a little bit more perhaps than people who are into technicalities of the instrument. You know, classical players and shredders who are just really delve into the real technical aspects of the instrument and pulling off amazing feats of, you know, guitar badassery. You're going to have a different perspective on this than somebody, say, who is trying to write a song in the vein of a John Prine or a Paul Simon or Bob Dylan or somebody, you know, like this. It's just a different experience. And I do believe that there is such a thing as a muse. I do believe that there is such a thing as genius, and it's something that visits itself upon you. Genius is not something, in music at least, is not something that you just are. It's not like a state of being, but it's something that visits you. And it's something that can just as easily leave you if you don't make the conditions correct for it to visit you again. So this is an interesting article. You guys should definitely go check this out. I'll put a link down in the description. As always, all the links to all these articles will be down in the description. But I just thought this was interesting. You know, he starts talking about Jimi Hendrix on the Dick Cavett show in 1969. I'm sure you've all seen the video of this where Jimmy's like, you know, he's just looks real like about this tall whenever Dick says, you know, many people think you're the greatest guitar player who's ever lived. And Jimmy's like, man, you know, please don't say that. That's, you know, please. He's like, I hate compliments. You know, compliments are so embarrassing sometimes because you know it's not really the truth. And I think Jimmy's right. You know, I think he knew his limitations as from the technical side of things. But Jimmy did, perhaps more than a lot of other people, make the conditions correct for the muse to visit him. And he was able to capture the muse onto tape more than a lot of his contemporaries and a lot of people since, and especially for guitarists. So, Jimmy definitely is among the greats. And I think, but he had a realistic vision of who he was and what his talents were and what his limitations were. And I think we all have that. I think for a lot of good guitar players, we are definitely our own worst critics. I look back on some of my playing on this channel and I'm just like, sometimes, I'm like, hey, that was kind of cool what I just did. But then other times it's like, oh man, I'm playing the same shit over and over again. I'm just so sick of hearing myself. I definitely get this. And I feel like this a lot. I'm sure I'm not alone. But this is part and parcel of living an artistic life and having artistic experiences and wanting to express ourselves artistically. The beauty of our age, the age in which we live, is that we do have the luxury of not having to go hunt for food. I don't have to go out my door wondering where my next meal is going to come from. We have a highly sophisticated agricultural system on the planet that we can sort of count on more or less to provide our daily bread, so we don't have to go scrounging for that, and it leaves a lot of free time. So here we are, we're playing guitar, we're talking about guitar, we're enjoying entertainment, we're consuming videos online, streaming, and having these sorts of conversations that enrich our lives mentally now, more than at any other time in human history. And you have to know that this is true. We are living in the golden age of entertainment and of luxury and of quality of life. There has been no other time in human history where we have had such great quality of life. It's just a fact. I mean, you can look around and you can doomsay all you want. You can naysay about the direction of humanity all you want. And sure, there's a lot of things I'd like to see different. There's a lot of, I guess, cultural things that maybe I disagree with, or I think we're going the wrong direction in or something. But, the fact remains, we are better off now as a species on this planet than we ever have been. Obviously, there are always going to be challenges in a realistic world. But at the same time, I feel confident that the genius of man can overcome these challenges. I feel hope for the future. I feel like my daughters will have a future, regardless of all of the, bad things that we see happening in the world. I think that good can overcome. I believe that good will overcome. And I believe that art, I believe that guitar playing, I believe that what I'm doing and what you're doing, partaking of, these innocent acts of, mental gymnastics and partaking in the luxury of entertainment, is on the good side. There's a lot of bad in our world, but I think there's more good than bad. As long as there have been artists are self-loathing. He goes into writers. He talks about Emily Dickinson had her sister burn all of her 40 hand-bound volumes of unpublished poetry after she died, which is, imagine the loss of that. Woody Allen hated his movie Manhattan, probably not quite as much as I do. Sorry, I don't like you. I don't like Woody Allen movies very much, but some people seem to like them. But they are critically acclaimed, so that's the point. And he goes into, talking about, when I hear players like Joe Bonamassa or John Mayer talk with such reverence about their guitar heroes, I feel like telling them, how can you not notice that you play way better than your heroes? But the truth is, what we perceive is not what is. Descartes argued that there is no reality behind the senses. We can't actually hear or see ourselves accurately because everything runs through a filter of the inner critic. Our egos are a building that we have constructed in which to live. We don't like having bits of our egos broken down or exposed for the world to see, because it's dangerous. This is part of the beauty and also the risk of art, is the exposure. of ourselves to criticism. If we pour our hearts and souls into something, and then a critic shits on it, that is a disaster. That's a tragedy for our self-worth, if you think about it. Because, you know, even if you don't respect the critic and you don't really respect their opinion in all other matters, you know, if somebody comes and shits on something that you really, truly believed in from the depths of your soul, that's gonna, it kind of leaves a mark. And then I think as we grow older, you know, those kinds of things tend to add up. And if you've had too many of them, too many times where people have kind of rejected the things about yourself that you loved the most, it kind of leaves a scar on the skin of your ego, and you become more and more of a scarred person. And at some point, you almost have to shed that skin and begin again if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven. You know, it's kind of like Jesus said, you know, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become as a child again. And I think there's something to be said about the act of creation, musical creation also included, that makes us a more childlike being. And, you know, I kind of went into this at length in the video that I made about the shredders and social anxiety and all of that. You know, how many, because of all the shredders, the really great technical guitar players who nonetheless have all this social anxiety and just anxiety about themselves and their playing and everything. And just, I mean, the most amazing players on the planet just don't know how good they are. And that's always been the case, hasn't it? I mean, it seems like that's always been the case. You know, I know some of them they can objectively say, you know, I know that I'm a good player, but I feel like at times I'm running over the same stuff again and again, and I'm not being creative. Even though a lot of other people will see me as a good player, and I can make that illusion happen, I still don't believe it myself, you know, and I think there's a lot of people like that. You know, Danny Gatton was, you know, he was probably one of the 2 or 3 greatest players this planet has ever produced. And he ends his life in a suicide, you know. I don't want to say too much about it because I'm not an expert on Danny Gatton, but you know, just from the things that I've read in the past, it just seemed like he ended his life in a really lonely place. He didn't know his own worth. I don't think he knew how much he was adored by others, and even if he did know, he didn't take it seriously. But that is the way of artists, isn't it? I mean, it is. It's just the way it is, man. Tchaikovsky was severely depressed. You know, I think Mendelssohn was a manic depressive. He would have moments of great creativity, and then he would lapse back into dark times and periods when he did nothing, you know, at all. So I mean, Beethoven is a great example as well. I mean, this goes back to the great composers through to present day, and you've got pop stars, you know, who end up blowing their brains out because they didn't know their own greatness, or they didn't know how important they were to other people. It was an interesting article to me, particularly because, you know, it just seems to be a recurring theme, you know, among artists, that we are our own worst critics. And sometimes, man, you got to get back to basics. You've got to sit in the dead of night, and you just got to pick up your guitar and just play like only God is listening.
Monkey see, monkey do. Rather be dead than cruel. Every line is a rhyme. Less is more.